change of scene for our video editing today. We're sitting in Bertie the motorhome on the North Wales coast, whilst Erica, poor girl, is sitting abandoned at home. In this video we're going to continue with the kitchen. At the end of the last video we'd left it looking like this, although we had also finished the fascia, which we'd leaned up against it just to see what it looked like, and we'd made the doors but we hadn't fixed them at that point. In this video we continue our kitchen fitting efforts, getting it to a point of which I really am quite proud. Although my goodness, it took a long time and a lot of work to get there. The day after we cut the hole for the sink hob unit, we decided we would do a bit more routing work on the worktop, this time on the edges. Mick said yesterday that it'd be nice to round the corners and have a nice rounded edge rather than the blunt straight edge that we had originally on this work surface. So I nipped out this morning and bought a round over bit for the router, and I am really impressed at how well that edge has come out. Mick then spent a couple of days rubbing down and giving multiple coats of varnish to the work surface and cupboards. But before he got as far as doing the cupboard doors, we decided they needed a bit more work. Buoyed with our success with the router on the work surface, we decided we'd like to round the corners of all of the doors. So I used a coffee table that we had as a guide in order to round this corner here to make a little jig, which we've then used as a further guide to round all the corners of the doors. So that just pops in there like that. With the trim router, it goes round the corner. And here's a fast rendition of us rounding all of those corners, after which I used the round over bit in the router to round the facing edges of the cupboard doors. The result of these two activities was a set of doors that looked much prettier than they had as plain oblong slabs of wood. I then set about finally securing the unit to the vehicle, screwing it into the back wall and into the floor. With the bolts we'd already put in the original seat fixing points, Mick thought I'd gone a little over the top in my efforts, but I argued that more fixing than necessary was better than too little. With the unit firmly affixed, we used OSB to line the bottom of the cupboards. There were two reasons for OSB rather than plywood, one being that it's inherently water resistant if either of our water containers should leak. The other is we didn't have enough ply and didn't want to buy a whole extra sheet when we had OSB going spare. I say the OSB was spare, but we did have to dismantle the larger of our two workbenches to reclaim the wood. As you see, we did use ply for the shelves in the middle of the cupboards. What we've done today is cut a couple of floors for the cupboard. That one was nice and straightforward, it was square. This one not quite so much, it had to be shaped around there, around that curve. And then we've also cut a couple of shelves, neither of which were entirely straightforward. This one had to be shaped both to go across this pillar and to go around the wheel arch, and this one also had to be shaped around the wheel arch. You may notice it's not an entirely snug fit because we made the mistake of using the template for the wheel arch box, which is underneath, without thinking about the fact that the extra distance it was higher up meant that it's a different shape at that height. As it's at the back of a cupboard, we're not going to worry too much about that. We've also screwed the cupboard bases into the battens. The shelves are also screwed into the battens, so hopefully when we're driving along nothing will be rattling and trying to come free. The instructions for the sink and hob are a little bit lacking in their detail. It's not complicated, it's easy enough to work out, but it's quite amusing how little they tell you about the parts they supply and what you're supposed to do with them. So there's a seal that comes unattached and I've just attached all around the edge. There is a set of screws and fixings, and there is the drain assembly. I already mentioned at the point that we cut out the template that these are all the instructions they give for the size of the hole and the routing out that you need to do. And just for amusement I thought I'd have a look and see what they tell you about how you then go about fixing it. And that is the entirety of the information about fixing it. Just a diagram telling you nothing more than you could have worked out just by looking at that bag of bits. Mick had now given the work surface 3 coats of varnish, making it lovely and shiny and hopefully more durable than it had been in its undressed state. This time-lapse has us affixing the top to the base by screwing up through the battens. I had to pay attention here as, for good reason, we'd placed some of those 28x18mm battens portrait and some landscape, and I certainly didn't want to mix up the sizes of screw I was using and burst through the top. Did I leave enough room for this? No was the clear answer. I couldn't cut the pipe until I bent it back on itself, because until then I didn't know exactly where I needed to cut. But once I had bent it back into position, it turned out there wasn't room to use the bigger and better pipe cutter. The mini cutter is a bit more fiddly, but it soon got the job done. You may notice that the shelf has disappeared in this footage. That shelf has been doing the hokey-cokey it's been in and out so much. On this occasion, we'd belatedly realised that a coat of varnish was required. Just made the gas connection under there, and I'm actually reasonably happy with how that routing of the pipe has turned out. I've put an extra pipe clip over there, so the only unsupported bit of pipe is as it comes back on itself, but of course it's supported at the point that it reaches the cooker. So next we need to pop out these little grommets which were just across the front so that the glass was protected from the metal as it travels. There you go, Mick's just popped that one out. And then we will take these cups, pop them into the holes, and then the screw goes down through them, and that goes into the little bit of work surface that's left after what we routed out. We've been around and put the screws into each of the cups in each of the fixing points. Started that off because I'm lazy with the electric screwdriver, and then finished it by hand just to make sure that I wasn't over tightening them. Underneath you can see this screw sticking through the work surface there, because the work surface is only about 9mm deep because of what we routed out, and obviously the screws allow for a much deeper work surface. So what we've done, and we're about to do the same to that one, is to put in little blocks of wood underneath each of the screws so it's pulling into something rather than just leaving the loose thread, just for that extra bit of security. And now in with the rubber grommets. And then the next thing to do will be to put a waste into that hole. I would also put a tap into that hole, except that when I came to fit the tap the other day I found that the tap I'd bought did not in fact fit in this sink, so that's had to go back, and I've had to order one that's twice as expensive. I think that feels proper exciting, that we have a vehicle that has a permanently fixed cooker and sink. Admittedly, we don't actually have a drain pipe off the sink, but we do have a drain in there. And the gas bottle isn't currently in, but we do have a gas pipe leading all the way to the gas bottle.
And a plug.
And a plug. And yeah, it feels like we've been, playing around with bits of wood till now, and now we've actually achieved something that is genuine live in your vehicle progress. And the next thing that needs to happen in the completion of this cabinet is that shelf that Mick just tapped over there forms the lid of the gas locker. I went round and sealed all the base of the gas locker this morning, and now I need to run round that shelf with a beader sealant before screwing it down so that we make sure there's no gaps where any gas can escape. Even though gas is heavier than air, still got to be good practice to seal around the top as well. Conveniently, whilst we've been sitting here installing the sink and the cupboard, Posty has just been with the tap. This tap cost £40, which is actually outrageous for what it is, but I couldn't find one of the right size any cheaper. And now what I need to do is take it apart, because the fitting this one came with is not the right fitting, so I did know that. At the same time, I ordered the correct fitting on the bottom, just there. So I'll get that swapped, and then we can pop that tap into the hole. And talking of holes, whilst we've been sitting here having a cup of coffee, I've just realised we've just put that shelf in for the second time. It went in yesterday. We took it out this morning to varnish it. We put it back in and then realised, daft fools, we've forgotten to put any holes through it for the sink waste and the water coming in. So that's going to have to come back out again. Changing this water connector here has proved to be the work of just a few moments. Remove that green pin out of there, pop out the old one, push the new one home, and then that pin should just slot back in, and that is it done. Another job of just a few moments to put that tap in. Just pop it through the hole with the seal in the right place, do it at the back nut, and that's all in. Obviously still needs to be connected once we've got the water container in. and it'll fold down so that the lid will close over the top of it. It's just a little bit of a shame that because of the shape of the tap and the shape of the sink, you can't have it slightly more central towards the middle of the sink. We have here the fascia panel for the front of the kitchen. It's all now being sanded, varnished, sanded, varnished, sanded, varnished. And likewise we have the doors, which we rounded the corners on and curved over the edges to make them look a little bit prettier. We're going to be fixing the door using some flush hinges. I splashed out on an arguably unnecessary self-centering drill bit just for the novelty. And there's some teensy tiny little screws that will fit inside of those little holes in these little hinges. And we also have a set of these catches, which there'll be one on each door. On the basis that the gas locker door, which is this one, is the most important, we'll probably start at the other end with that door, so that if there are lessons to be learnt, which there surely will be in the fitting of these doors, then we'll hopefully have got it all right by the most critical one by the time we get to this end. The first door is in and took quite a long while, and we certainly learnt things that will help with the installing the other doors. If I was to pick faults in it, I'd point out that even though we tried our very best to get the hinges exactly lined up, and bearing in mind there is no adjustment in these hinges, we managed to get this one about a mil out of line with this one. This one's just slightly further inset. If anybody's looking that closely at our doors, once it's installed, then I would worry about their priorities. We knew when we ordered the catches that they're designed for doors that are thicker than this 12mm ply, so we knew we were going to have to put a gasket around, which we just made a few of them out of hardboard just to give that bit of padding, and that's fine. But what we failed to think about was the fact that this catch plate, actually we did think about it at the point that we bought them, we just completely forgot by the time we came to fit, that this catch plate would also need to be modified in its position to take account of that. So what we have at the moment when that is shut is that this door has quite a bit of movement in it. So we're now going to do what we'd anticipated and then forgotten, which is to put another block of wood just on the back here so that we can set that catch further back. All of the doors are on and all working. We weren't able to record what we were doing with that because we're in a rather confined and, as you might see over there, rather messy with offcuts of bits and pieces of Erica place, and there was nowhere really we could mount the camera. But in case previous time-lapse footage has given the impression that all this is really quick to do, I will just say that just installing those 4 doors has taken us in the region of 5 to 6 hours. And the process has been, we've had to work out where the hinge goes on each door so that it's nicely positioned. We've got it 55mm from the top and the bottom. Drill pilot holes for each side of the hinge, position the hinge. However, you can't then, we couldn't, maybe it is possible, we found it easier to then position the latch with the door not in place, so having put the door on it had to come back off. We then had to work out the position for the hole for the latch because we had to drill right through the door and get that in the right position. We actually had a bit of a nightmare with this one. It turns out that one of the latches was a little bit out of tolerance, and we played around with it for quite a while before we decided we just needed to use a different latch. So it's a whole process of putting that latch on there, plus of course we had to cut the gaskets because our doors aren't thick enough. On the gas cupboard we had to inset the mounting plate, and on the back of all of the mounting plates we've had to place another piece of wood on the back because, again, our fascia panel isn't deep enough really for the locks that we bought. That's because you can't get locks of the type we wanted to fit the size of board that we have used. So explaining that makes it sound like, how in the world could that have taken 6 hours? But it did. But pretty pleased with the end result. As fascias made out of plywood go, I don't think that's looking too bad. Our intention originally was to buy an expensive piece of furniture board, but a bit like the work surface, we thought we'll go with the cheap option and see how good a job we can do before we commit to more expensive materials. And actually, I think that looks good enough to keep. And clearly there's a hole over there without a door. We really ought to have made a door to go there. We've come to fit the fascia onto the kitchen carcass and have just had to shave a couple of mil off the top to make it a nice fit. And having done that and established that, yep, the height is right the whole way along, we still couldn't get it to go in properly, and every time we're pushing it at the top it was coming out at the bottom and vice versa. And it was one of those moments where you slap yourself on the forehead and shout, idiots, because this is the problem that we have introduced. We've nicely positioned the doors in the middle, we've put the door catches in the middle, and we've put the little blocks for the catches to go in the middle, completely forgetting that there's a shelf that comes right to the very front of the cupboard. Our solution to that problem has been to move this batten which holds the front of the shelf back by 15mm and to take a notch out of the shelf that clears both the door lock and the mounting plate on the back of the cupboard. So now that allows this fascia to push all the way back as it should, and we're now fit to be able to screw that fascia onto the cupboard. Before we put the fascia on the kitchen cabinet, we thought we'd best just put in some restraints for the water bottles. The water bottles are going to live under the shelf here. We've now notched out the back of that shelf so that the pipes will all run down, and as you can see we've just put in some little battens just so that when the bottles are full they're not going to slide around and slosh around in that cupboard. And we can access those bottles from the door side. We needed a little restraint here with the problem that there's not actually enough height between the top of the bottle and the shelf to be able to lift it over a batten. So we've just put a batten with a couple of bits of tube running through it, which will then slot in there and lift out when we need to get the bottle out. We've had minor agonies over how to affix the fascia to the front of this unit. The original intention was to screw through from behind, but looking at it when it's now all finished, I can see that there's some issues with that. The really easy solution would be to screw in from the front, but I don't really want exposed screws, and if we were to countersink them, fill them, it'd still be obvious we wouldn't get an exact colour match to the fascia. So you can see there, down the bottom there and there, some brackets that I think I've put in places that are going to be well enough accessible even when the fascia is on to be able to get screws in from behind. And then there will be some places where we screw through from the front, behind cupboard doors, right into that end, and also down the bottom into this end. And hopefully those fixture points will be enough to make sure that's firmly in place and can't rattle. Before we fitted the fascia, we made a new door for the top left-hand aperture, fitted the hinges and catch to it, then Mick gave it a couple of coats of varnish. Whilst he did that, I fitted the fascia using the fixing points I showed in a video snippet a few moments ago, only one of which proved to be tricky to access. The final thing we needed to do once the varnish had dried was to attach that last door, which is what you see us doing here. At the point that we fitted the gas locker door, we attached a seal the whole way round it, which makes that door stand out by a few mil. So that the cupboard above didn't sit closer into the fascia, we also fitted a seal to the opening edge of that one too. I don't know quite how we managed to not make that final door at the same time that we made the others, but we have now done it. It's all varnished, and that is it. The kitchen unit is complete. Back when we fitted the doors, I pointed out that this door was about a mil out, that its top hinge is about a mil too far in, and since then we've noticed another little issue with the unit being out of tolerance. It's an issue that we introduced actually quite a way through the build. However, I'm not going to highlight that. If you want to know what that is, you'll have to find us parked in a lay-by one day and come round for a cup of tea and inspect it very closely. I didn't think we could reasonably declare the kitchen as complete until we had the gas working, so we just plumbed in the gas bottle. We have flames. It's quite exciting.
And heat.
And a lot of heat coming off them. And as you've seen, we have gas. We can sit in here and have a cup of coffee, although it would be nicer if we still had the bed in here. And we need to drill a hole in the floor and fix the diesel heater before we put the bed in. So that will be the next job, but that'll be for next week.